So this is another one of my Politics for Young People videos where I'll give you info that I promise you'll be better off for knowing. The first one of these videos I did was why racism in America will never go away, and I'll put that in the description if you missed it. So most people understand that many whites in the South these days are Republicans, and it's where you find many of your Republican red states. But this wasn't always the case, and the majority of Southern whites used to be Democrats actually. And it's important you know how and why this changed, since it's important you understand the reasons why things happen. The way white Southerners changed from Democrat to Republican has to do with what was called the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy was created during what I'm just simply calling the Nixonian Republican Party. So the 1960s ultimately saw the creation of a series of laws, which I'm sure you know, called civil rights, and Lyndon Johnson carried a good amount of John Kennedy's legacy. Johnson was a Democrat, but not a liberal like Kennedy was. The Republican Party, in the early 1970s, once Nixon was elected, correctly bet that there would be a good amount of white Southern Democrat voters that would be angry with the passage of civil rights for blacks, and they were right. So they created a two-pronged strategy. The first part was to create what many people know of and is very much attributed to Richard Nixon, which is the creation of the Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, and what's been called the War on Drugs. So let's discuss this war on drugs just for a second. By the way, the reason why the war on drugs has never been won is because, quite frankly, too many people like drugs, that's just the truth, and the biggest American banks make so much money laundering money for drug kingpins. This, folks, is a fact, by the way. Big names like Chase, Citibank, etc. to this day. Jamie Dimon, who always gets way too much press coverage than he deserves. This is part of what big banks do and have been doing for 50 years. And second, the war on drugs is a war on black people. And I'm not, nor have I ever been a liberal. Okay, and I'm still saying this because it's the truth. It was a way to put black males, mainly, behind bars, and it's still working 50 years later. Putting blacks behind bars for long prison sentences is something that whites who don't like blacks are very much interested in. It's pretty simple logic when you think about it from that standpoint.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
The second group that was targeted, and keep in mind Richard Nixon ended the Vietnam War, and I'm not going to get into the war in Vietnam, but it did finally come to an end, and the additional group to target was white hippies who were against the war throughout the late 60s and into the early 70s. Many of these were either white college students, as well as maybe some vagabonds with long hair, etc. So college students do what, generally, and I've had students that have military experience prior and then they go into college. But generally, college students go to college instead of enrolling in the military. So that was yet another way to make distinctions. Liberals who were college educated protested the war while being seen as insensitive to families who had sons, at the time I'm just saying sons, who didn't go to college but instead went to war. And these protesters were perceived as disloyal and unpatriotic to their country. So both of these groups were successfully targeted, and now you know why there's been a shift over the past 50 years and how, interestingly enough, most white Southerners used to be Democrats before becoming red state Republicans. So send me your comments and questions, and each week you'll get a chance to win a copy of one of my books, your choice, either my book on presentation skills or business writing skills.